Hey, yeah, hello everybody. Welcome to week 3 of the course. Trying to get this video in on a Sunday evening in the last bit of natural light that we have here left up in the Pacific Northwest in Bellingham, Washington, where I'm at these days. Where are we at? It's week 3 of the course. I just want to say that for those of you, we've got a pretty good following going. I'm always impressed. It's always a little nerve-wracking when you wait to see how students are going to do and how well they're going to engage with the course and with the way we sort of I have it set up. I think you guys have been finding, by and large, a large chunk of us as a class have been contributing to the discussion and getting the post in on, in a relatively timely manner so that it's relevant, right? Like if you want to succeed in this course, the best thing to do is to stay in tune with the pace of the course and check in with it every week so that you understand sort of where we're moving as a group. And in some ways, a class, every time you teach, in a semester of literature, the class will it takes on a life of its own. And we sort of discover things that we didn't always intend to sort of discover as we sort of started out. For this week, I just want to say that you guys are really finding some really neat and interesting stuff. I've chimed in whenever I can, and I'll continue to do so going forward. As always, if you want to gain the most of my attention, you should probably post a little bit sooner in the week rather than later in the week. That's just the way things work out. Like if somebody's going to post tonight or something, I'll eventually get to it, but just not quite as much. And once after, like maybe Tuesday, when this video is released, after last night, I'm not going to really respond to it much at all. Like I'm going to continue to sort of go on, and I'm going to keep my headspace where we're at as a class. I guess some real quick housekeeping. Other than that, by and large, everybody's doing a fantastic job. Let's just keep doing the work we are. I will say we should begin to think about tying some of our ideas, or beginning to think about at least, the types of things that we're finding online in our searches, and tying those back into the novels that we're reading for the course, right? Let's stay conscious of that, of what the research we're conducting and how it might relate to the book in some way. And I'm going to talk about Soko quite a bit here and just, as we sort of go forward. And I'll try to keep this relatively short. The other thing I've done is you'll see a section in the Blackboard called Viewing Materials on the left-hand column there. Check in Viewing Materials, and I'll be posting various films and stuff up along the way. And when I post stuff in there, it's not required that you view it, but you may find, not everybody, like it could be interesting, right, to use it. It's not required, but you could use those materials to sort of help you succeed in the course, right? But again, you might want to see anything within that viewing material and then relate it back to the novels that we're reading in the course, right? But the viewing materials are not required viewing. But I'll continue to put it up. And there's several things that I put in there so far. One is Gana Satake's. I'm going to read down here. I've got a list. I can't remember all this. But Gana Satake, 270 Years of Resistance, is a great film about the incident at Oka. And the Mohawks, who are Iroquoian, they're like the northern door of Iroquois, which runs all the way down through Georgia and along the Appalachian Range. My folks are Cherokee from down near what's now Knoxville, Tennessee, or Tellico, Tennessee, as it used to be called. Gana Satake is up at the end of that, and there's it's a long documentary, but it's really good on actual militaristic resistance to the United States, to the Canadian government. With Mohawks, and there's also a related dramatic film. That's a documentary. Also a dramatic film called Frozen River that's pretty interesting. You may like, that's about that same sort of region. And I also posted a link to Upstream Battle, I think, that sort of came up in a discussion. I've also just going to be posting, let's see if it's loaded up yet. I'll look real quick. Black Robe, if it's not up already, it soon will be. It's still loading, but it will be. I'm going to load Black Robe up. It's a real, it's a good film. It's early on, and it's somewhat authentic, and again about that sort of same area of the world, what's now upstate New York, southern Ontario, and southern Quebec. Check that viewing material out. Now let's switch real quick, I guess, to the reading. You needed to have read for this last week, up to the first 100 pages in Almanac of the Dead. For this week, you'll need to read just about another 100 pages. up to about 200, page 200 or so. But I mean, what do we say about Almanac? There's a lot to love about this book, but also a lot to sort of critique the book for. I mean, I think it's an interesting work in that it sort of establishes this ideas of Indianness, this idea of outlawry, because of where, I mean, this is a book that, I guess I'll confess, I sort of love reading, and I was attracted to a lifestyle that was a bit of the underbelly of the United States, right? I've always, we're talking about here, we're talking about strippers, we're talking about illicit drug use, we're talking about outlaw biker gangs, we're talking about everything that is the American Southwest, that great tradition in some ways, I would argue, that great American tradition of outlawry, right? And we turn many of our outlaws into heroes, right? And we can see this reflected across both all spectrums of the reality of what we call the United States, right? And we have this real fascination with criminals. And we have this fascinating criminal history, right? And we are very much a nation, we incarcerate more people than anywhere else on the face of the earth, right? We have 25% of the world's prison population, and we make up like, I don't know, man, like a couple of percentages of the global population, right? That's insane, how many of our own people that we lock up. But we also have this great tradition of outlaws as heroes. And so for this week two, and even week one, I want to think about these first couple of hundred pages as being what I would call Indians, outlaws, and Indian outlaws, and how it sort of relates to the character of Sterling in the novel, his relationship with Hollywood and whatever it was that he exposed back there, that the tribal council has in some ways banned him from living back at Laguna. And it should matter that Silko's as an author is Laguna. And so in some ways it's this story of an outsider, someone who's been cast about into the world of the late 20th century. This book is published in 91, I think 92. Takes Silko a very long time to write it. You should also look at the video that I posted up for last week. It's in the announcement section. It's a quick interview with her, and it's very dated, but it's also one that is it's contemporary to the time that she wrote the novel, if that matters, right? And so this novel is gonna take us into the underside, the underworld that is America in some ways, and I think it's specifically for that sort of underworldism that this novel is striving for, and it's one I can't stress it enough. It's one that if you have things that trigger you, if you have behaviors and stuff, shocking material, shocking imagery about death and death of small children. Right, I mean, this is really, and people videotaping, and this is leading me into a discussion of what I'm going to call in a minute queer panic. But the characters of Beaufrey, the character of David, right, less so Eric, and the character of Pharaoh and his sidekick Polly. These characters are queer characters in the novel, meaning they're outside the realm of what we might consider to be normative, right, or a heteronormative world, right, where I'm talking in sort of sexuality study terms now, or in queer theory terms now. But the novel engages in these ideas of sort of queer panic, right? And it's in some ways, and the novel is to be critiqued for that, right? And I've put a couple of quotes in the discussion section this week from a thesis that I've had, and if you're interested in looking at, and I'll talk about this more maybe in just a second, but I mean, so the idea, other people have argued that either this particular work by Silko and another one by Grovant, Blackfeet writer named James Welch, called The Heart Song of Charging Out. They both have these sort of ideas of sort of queer panic in them, and Charging Out, a Native American male character kills a French character who's having sex with him. in the act of it, and this idea of sort of queer panic. And queer panic is this sort of profound fear, in some senses, right, of homosexuality, and it was used as a defense. For a long time, the idea was coined in the 1920s or so by a psychiatrist, that this idea that heteronormative men will suddenly become panicked, and so then that they, and that's a normal reaction to something as abnormal as homosexuality. And of course, this has all been debunked, right, sort of going forward. But but the novel is sort of guilty of that, perhaps, right, of having this queer panic in it, because there are these queer, with Beaufry, David, and the way that they treat Cease and the stealing of her child, gay white male characters in this novel are portrayed as the personification of all evil, right? Some people have wanted to rescue this novel and saying, well, if those characters are there, but it's a metaphor, right? Their behaviors in some way, although it's a stereotypical white male character, right? And this fear of sort of gayness, right? And it carries with it all these sort of fraught anxieties about it. Other people have said that Silko uses this, and the same so with the writer Welch, I mentioned before, but Silko uses this to project in some ways the fear of the great coming of Euro-Western Europeans and their literal sort of raping of the land and raping of the people and raping of the culture, right? This ongoing 500-year settler colonialist process, which Silko was writing against, that she locates in some ways that evilness of that in these characters who seem in some ways otherworldly or outside, even alien or something to be feared, right? This is something that's almost sort of unknowable, right? And maybe that's a rescue for it, and maybe it isn't, right? That I'm not specifically sure of. But if you want to read more about some of this, you could read the works of Craig Womack. First of all, if you're interested in reading more about this, send me an email or something, and I'll certainly put you in touch with some more in-depth materials. But Craig Womack, Daniel Heath Justice, right? There's the quotes that I put up in, sorry, that's my dog. There's some quotes that I put up in the discussion section with the links to a thesis that you might find interesting to read. But, we're going to have to sort of contend with this sort of power structure that is completely eccentric, right, within the novel. And I think in some ways, right, quite frankly, I think within our contemporary times, I mean, even today, right, I think we're in these times of great eccentricity, right? I think that we as a global population in the year 2017, I think that we live in times of extreme eccentricity, right? And this novel in some ways is also portraying a time of what it understood to be extreme eccentricity in the 1990s, right? But trying to locate it in something that is almost completely unfathomable in its sense of evilness, right? Within the characters of Beaufry, David, lesser so with Eric, but certainly within Beaufry and David and other characters sort of going forward, there's going to be these intense sort of moments of great evil. So, and she locates those in some senses in gay white male characters. It would be interesting for us to discuss that going forward as to why. If people aren't interested in that, that's fine too. We can continue to move forward. But in a similar sort of space as that is Sterling, as the Laguna character who has worked on the railroads and then comes back to Laguna and gets involved in the uranium mine, which is there, and you should look that up, right? I mean, much of this novel is contained in in a historical, factual context, and much of it is otherworldly, or what I said before was probably underworldly, right? And so inhabiting there within that world of the underworld is everything that's sort of seedy, and this is where this novel sort of locates itself within the city of Tucson, Arizona, which has this great sort of criminal outlaw frontier history to it, right, in Western lore. So, and from this, right, the character of Leche is going to begin to sort of translate these old Mayan codices, these old Mayan books of law, right, that she has, that were, some of them are housed in a Dresden museum and others in Paris, but apparently Leche has these old notebooks of the old story of the Almanac of the Dead, and she's going to translate that for us. So be prepared as we read forward in this novel to deal with those, with that underworld of place, right? And I want us to begin to think about why it is that Indians would inhabit some some such place as such an outlawed space, right? It's those spaces that are outlawed and beyond the margins and have to be contained in some ways and controlled. All right, I will leave it there for this week, and I'll check in with you next week in week 4. Keep reading up to page 200 and keep up the good work. Thanks. Bye.